There was a moment on 92.3 The Fan that most people probably scrolled past, a blink and you miss it second of live radio that if you weren't paying close attention would have seemed like nothing. Anthony Lima, one of the most recognizable voices in Cleveland sports media, asked Andrew Berry a simple, direct question. If Deshaun Watson wins this quarterback competition and plays well this fall, do you see a world where he is the Browns quarterback going forward? And before Berry could even begin his answer, before the general manager could reach for his carefully prepared, diplomatic response, Anthony Lima snorted. Not a laugh, not a cough, a snort. The kind of involuntary, uncontrollable physical reaction that happens when your body rejects something before your brain has a chance to stop it. And in that half second of live radio, Anthony Lima said what the entire city of Cleveland has been thinking for months but hasn't been allowed to say out loud. This video is going to break down everything. Every word Andrew Berry said during that interview, every carefully chosen phrase, every deliberately vague answer, every moment where he said more by not saying something than he did with the words that actually came out of his mouth. Because once you understand why Berry went on this media tour in the first place, once you understand the purpose behind every single public appearance he's made leading into training camp, everything he said on that radio program lands completely differently. And by the end of this, you're going to see exactly what Cleveland's general manager just told the entire fan base without ever technically saying it. Let's start with the big picture because context is everything here. Andrew Berry did not wake up one morning and decide he wanted to spend his week sitting across from microphones in Northeast Ohio talking about football philosophy. General managers do not voluntarily expose themselves to live radio and unscripted questions unless there is a specific and urgent reason to do so. And the reason here is not complicated once you see it clearly. The Cleveland Browns are sitting on top of one of the most emotionally charged, financially complicated, and franchise-defining quarterback decisions in their entire history. Deshaun Watson, the quarterback they traded the entire future of this franchise to acquire, the man who became a symbol of organizational dysfunction and desperation, is somehow still on this roster, still in this building, still listed as a competitor for the starting quarterback job. That situation does not manage itself. You cannot simply stay quiet, put out a press release, and hope Cleveland football fans process that reality with calm and rationality. These are Browns fans. They have been through quarterback purgatory for the better part of 3 years. They watched Watson's tenure disintegrate into an injury-plagued nightmare. They watched emergency starter after emergency starter take snaps in a stadium that deserved better. They're tired, they're skeptical, and they're desperate for someone in a position of authority to stand in front of them and say, "We see it, we understand it, and we are handling it the right way." That is why Andrew Berry went on the radio. That is why he sat down with Lima and Daryl Ruiter. That is the entire purpose of this media tour. Not Myles Garrett. That situation was already resolved before Berry picked up any single microphone. This tour was always, from the very first appearance to the very last answer, about convincing Cleveland Nation that the quarterback competition is being managed with intelligence, with strategy, and the long-term health of this franchise is the only priority. And here is where it gets genuinely fascinating, because Berry did exactly that. He managed it. He was careful, he was diplomatic, he was measured in every single response. But if you were listening closely enough, if you were paying attention not just to what he said, but to how he said it, what he chose to emphasize, what he chose to leave vague, and what language he reached for when describing each of these two quarterbacks separately, the picture that emerges is not ambiguous at all.
Let's talk about the word phenomenal. When Lima asked Berry about Shedeur Sanders, about his ascent from a fifth-round selection that raised eyebrows across the entire league to a genuine quarterback competition participant, Berry didn't give a standard GM non-answer. He didn't reach for safe, sanitized front office language. He said the growth over the last 8 to 10 weeks had been amazing. He said the development actually began back in January and February, during the dead period. during the stretch of the offseason when most players are simply staying in shape and waiting for the calendar to move forward. And then he went one step further. He called it phenomenal. Stop right there for a second, because that word matters more than people gave it credit for when it first aired. Andrew Berry is not a man who speaks carelessly. If you have watched any of his public appearances, any of his press conferences, any of his interviews since taking over the general manager role in Cleveland, you already know that he is precise, he is deliberate, and he is deeply aware that every single thing he says in front of a microphone gets examined, dissected, and interpreted at 17 different levels by 17 different audiences. He knows that reporters are transcribing him. He knows that fans are rewinding clips. He knows that his words carry organizational weight in a city that is starving for clarity on this quarterback situation. And knowing all of that, with full awareness of what his language would mean and how it would land, he looked at a live radio host and described the development arc of his fifth-round rookie quarterback as phenomenal. He did not say promising. He did not say encouraging. He did not say on the right track or showing progress or giving us reasons to be excited. He said phenomenal. And he backed it up. He talked about the specific work Shedeur put in during January and February, unprompted, during the dead period when no one was watching and no cameras were rolling. He talked about the 8 to 10 week spring arc in precise terms. He talked about how the development that started in those quiet winter months carried directly through OTAs and into Minicamp. He talked about the entire organization's eagerness, his word, to see Shedeur Sanders operate in real-world, less controlled, high-pressure situations during fall camp in the preseason. That is not how you talk about a quarterback you are genuinely unsure about. That is not the language of a 50-50 evaluation. That is a man who has already seen something he believes in, who is watching a story unfold the way he hoped it would, and who is struggling to contain his professional excitement within the boundaries of appropriate GM speak. Now compare that to how we talked about Deshaun Watson, because the contrast is where this whole thing becomes impossible to ignore. Lima asked Berry directly, if Watson wins the competition and plays well, would Berry consider extending his contract and keeping him as the franchise quarterback going forward? It was as clear and direct a question as you can ask a general manager about a quarterback situation, and Berry's answer was textbook diplomatic deflection. He said it's all on the table. He brought up Sam Darnold's remarkable turnaround in Minnesota. He mentioned Daniel Jones. He brought up Geno Smith. He even referenced Baker Mayfield's career resurrection in Carolina. He said you have to be open-minded, you have to be flexible, and he wouldn't rule anything out. On the surface, that reads like a fair, balanced, genuinely open-minded response from a general manager keeping his options open. If you're listening casually, you might think, okay, Berry is treating this as a real competition, both guys have a shot, nothing is predetermined. But look deeper at the actual structure of that answer, because the structure tells the real story. When Berry talked about Shedeur Sanders, he gave you specifics, dates, timelines, individual details about the work, the growth, the arc, the organizational reaction. He gave you the texture of a story he has been closely watching and clearly cares about. When Berry talked about Deshaun Watson, he gave you historical analogies. He gave you other quarterbacks from other teams in other situations who surprised people after being written off. He gave you philosophical openness. He gave you the concept of not ruling things out rather than actual evidence of belief. Think about what those three comparisons actually are. Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones, Geno Smith. Those are not examples of quarterbacks who were universally celebrated and simply needed a change of scenery to thrive. Those are quarterbacks who most of the football world had given up on. Quarterbacks whose windows were considered closed. Quarterbacks who went somewhere new and shocked people, including the organizations that brought them in. That is the category Berry placed Watson in. Not the category of a franchise cornerstone, not the category of a proven winner getting another opportunity to lead. The category of pleasant surprises that nobody fully saw coming and that require an open mind precisely because no one was actually expecting them. One of those responses sounds like a man talking about the quarterback he has already chosen. The other sounds like a man professionally managing a difficult, expensive, emotionally complicated situation with as much grace as he can muster.
There is another layer to this that most people glossed over, and it has to do with how Barry described the evaluation process itself. When Daryl Reuter asked Barry how fans and media should be interpreting what comes out of practice, Barry pushed back against what he called the day trader mentality. He described it as the impulse to assess every single throw, every single rep, every single session as though it were a stock price fluctuating in real time. And he dismissed that approach entirely. He said the organization views spring football as a period for installation and growth, not for grading individual moments. He said that players are supposed to struggle during this phase. They are supposed to fail, require correction, and develop in response to that correction. That is not a failure of the process. That is the process working exactly as it is designed to work. Now, on the surface, that framing sounds like Barry is protecting both quarterbacks equally. He's not giving you permission to read too much into a bad practice or get overly excited about a great one. He's asking for patience and perspective across the board. But there is something specific about how that framing applies to Shedeur Sanders that is worth sitting with. Barry acknowledged that there had been some pre-snap communication issues during minicamp. He admitted that Shedeur was not perfect every single day, but the entire philosophical framework he laid out, judge the arc, not the moment, judge the response to correction, not the mistake itself, judge the growth over months, not the snapshot of a single afternoon, is a framework that almost perfectly maps onto what a young, fifth-round developmental quarterback's journey looks like. It does not map on to what a 10-year veteran with a massive, fully guaranteed contract is supposed to be doing. Watson should not be in an installation and growth phase. Watson should not be a player who needs to be evaluated over an arc. Watson should be walking into Cleveland Browns training camp as a finished product. The fact that Barry's entire evaluation philosophy sounds far more applicable to Sanders than to Watson is not a coincidence. It is a window into how this organization is actually thinking about what it is building and who it is building it around. And then there is the offense itself. Barry made a point during his media appearances to discuss the new offensive infrastructure Cleveland has built around the quarterback position this offseason. He talked about Todd Monken as offensive coordinator and how Monken's philosophy and methods differ significantly from Stefanski's approach. He talked about the acquisitions made in the draft, Denzel Boykin taken at 39 overall, Casey Okonkwo at 24 overall, Isaiah Bond entering year 2 with a full offseason of development behind him, Harold Fannin Jr. already emerging as one of the most versatile tight end weapons in the entire organization's recent history. He talked about Quinn Ewers-Judkins as a running back, adding an additional dimension to the attack, and he described all of it, every single piece, as part of a conscious, deliberate effort to create an environment that gives the quarterback every opportunity to succeed. Sit with that framing for a moment because it matters enormously. You do not describe offensive infrastructure in those terms when you were building around a bridge quarterback. You do not spend 2 premium draft picks, restructure your entire offensive identity, and bring in a new offensive coordinator with a distinct philosophical vision if the man under center is simply a temporary placeholder while you figure out your long-term plan. You do not talk about an environment for a quarterback in those terms when that quarterback is young, when that quarterback is still developing, and when the entire point of the environment is to accelerate his growth and set the conditions for him to become exactly what you believe he can be.
Barry built that offense for Shedeur Sanders. The language he used to describe it tells you that in plain terms if you are willing to hear it. The most revealing moment of the entire media tour came when Lima brought up Jimmy Haslam. By now, everyone in Cleveland has heard the owner's public comments about the Deshaun Watson situation. Haslam stood in front of microphones and called it a swing and a miss. Not a disappointing outcome, not an unfortunate development. A swing and a miss. From the owner of the franchise, about the quarterback the franchise gave everything to acquire. That is a statement with weight. That is an owner publicly distancing himself from one of the most significant and costly decisions in team history. And Lima, doing exactly what a good radio host should do, asked Barry directly, do public comments like that from the owner make it harder for the front office and the coaching staff to fairly evaluate a player?
Barry's answer was almost clinical in how measured it was. He said that public opinion does not significantly influence the team's player evaluations or Todd Monken's lineup construction. He said, "You deal with what you have and whether players advance or not." He drew a clear and deliberate line between what is said publicly and what drives organizational decisions. And if you were evaluating him purely as a general manager, that is exactly the right answer. You cannot let owners' soundbites contaminate your evaluation process. Media narratives cannot be allowed to taint how you assess player performance. That is professionalism, and Barry demonstrated it. But here is what Barry did not do. He did not push back on the framing. He did not say he disagreed with Haslam's characterization. He did not say Deshaun Watson still has a lot to offer, or that the situation is more nuanced than the owner's comments suggested, or that the team still believes there is meaningful football left in Watson's career. He simply stated that public discourse does not drive organizational decisions and then moved on. That is not a defense of Deshaun Watson. That is a man who has already made peace with the Watson chapter of this story and is now entirely focused on what comes next. Barry has compartmentalized it. The situation is what it is. The money is spent, the decision cannot be undone, and the only thing that matters now is getting this competition handled with integrity and making sure the right man is standing at the podium when training camp opens. Barry's complete absence of any emotional investment in defending Watson tells you everything about where that emotional investment has actually gone. So, let's bring this all the way home, because the picture is clear now, even if the official announcement hasn't come yet. Cleveland is building something new. The offensive infrastructure has been rebuilt from the ground up. New coordinator, new philosophy, new weapons at receiver and tight end, a running back who adds real dimension to the attack. Every single element of the offensive rebuild Barry described during this media tour is oriented toward the future, toward growth, toward a quarterback who is going to be running this offense for the next several years. Barry's own language, the specifics he used for Sanders, the enthusiasm he conveyed, the detail with which he traced the development arc from January through minicamp, all of it points in one direction. Deshaun Watson is competing. Barry made that clear, and he wasn't lying about it. The competition is real in the sense that Watson has the experience, the physical tools, and the professional preparation to push Shedeur Sanders. Watson has been in this league long enough to know how to get ready for a situation like this, and dismissing him completely would be intellectually dishonest. But the framing Barry chose when discussing Watson's potential, analogies to comeback stories, philosophical openness, historical exceptions, is not the language of a front office that is secretly hoping Watson wins this thing. It is the language of a front office that is professionally managing a complicated and expensive situation while quietly, carefully, and unmistakably centering everything around the man they genuinely believe in. So, the competition will play out through training camp and the preseason. Barry will let the process breathe. He will not name a starter before a snap has been taken in a meaningful setting, because that is the right way to handle it, and because Barry understands that giving Watson a legitimate opportunity protects the organization, honors the competition, and ultimately makes the story cleaner when Shedeur Sanders is named the Cleveland Browns starting quarterback.
And that is where this ends. Not with a dramatic announcement, not with a press conference or a leaked report or an anonymous source. It ends the way it began, with a snort on live radio, with Anthony Lima, a man who covers this team every single day, who has heard every press conference and watched every practice report and processed every piece of information that has come out of Berea for months, being asked whether Deshaun Watson might be the future of this franchise. In his body, before his professional instincts could stop it, told the truth. Because somewhere in Cleveland, in every barbershop conversation, in every group chat, and every passionate argument among actual Browns fans who have watched the practices and read the reports and paid close attention to how the general manager of their football team talks about these two quarterbacks, the answer has already become obvious. You can feel it in the way Barry's voice changes when Sanders comes up. You can read it in the structure of his answers. You can hear it in the organizational enthusiasm he cannot fully contain, even when he is trying his hardest to stay neutral. Cleveland already knows.
Shedeur Sanders is the guy. And without ever saying those words out loud, without ever making an official declaration or breaking protocol or stepping outside the bounds of what a GM is supposed to say in the middle of a training camp competition, Andrew Berry just spent an entire radio interview telling you exactly that. The snort said it first, but everything that came after confirmed it. Drop a comment below. Do you think this competition is already decided, or does Deshaun Watson genuinely still have a shot when training camp opens? And if this breakdown gave you something real to think about, hit that subscribe button. This channel doesn't do spin, just the truth.